David, thank you for the introduction. I do think it's unfortunate, though, that we get a round of applause when it's mentioned that Mark and I are two senators who get along, who work together to try to accomplish things for the good of the order rather than for the good of the party. I think it's unfortunate that that is being recognized now as perhaps the exception. We're sitting here a week before Christmas trying to figure out what the exit strategy is. There's a lot of you who've been around for a long time, whether it's 25 years or even more than that. And I think it's fair to say that we are at that point where the politics has completely consumed where we are. It's not the policy of the initiatives that we're dealing with right now. And it's put us in a position where not much good, I think, is coming from it. How many messaging votes have we had in the past month, only to be able to say, by gosh, as Republicans, we're not going to increase your taxes, or by gosh, as Democrats, we're going to protect the middle class. I'm not convinced that the people in this country really want more messaging. I think what they want is some governing. When I was asked to join Mark this morning, this was one of those appearances where you think, well, now exactly what is it that we want to talk about? And we're going to talk about how on the Energy Committee we ought to be working together to advance good policy that is viewed as a bipartisan effort, or is it a discussion about kind of where we are within this political process? And I decided to just kind of let this be a little bit of a free-for-all, because I note on the invitation so much of this is supposed to be Q&A. So this is where I think we have an opportunity to really try to address some things in a more free format. But as I was coming over here this morning, Tom Coburn was on C-SPAN TV, and Tom was speaking about the fact that he has self-imposed term limits. And he said, sometimes around here, we focus on what is best for our political interests rather than the interests of the country. And I think we are at that point as we are approaching a presidential election. Every day it gets a little bit closer. You have so many decisions that are being made simply based on the politics of the moment and what is coming forward within these campaigns. I think that's unfortunate. I think it is a situation again where we are forgetting who it is that we represent. We are focusing on our parties rather than the people of Alaska or the people of Colorado. And I think to a certain extent my write-in campaign last year allowed for a little bit of a release, if you will. When you're not your party's nominee, you're kind of a hybrid no man's land in the middle. The expectations from your base are perhaps a little bit different. I look now at my base and say it's everything from that hardcore libertarian miner who lives out in the middle of nowhere to the lifelong Democrat teacher and everybody in between. And I think that that's a good thing for us to recognize that that's our base. It's those people in Alaska that come from all quarters. We're so fixated on meeting our party's needs as opposed to the people that we represent that I think we've lost some of our focus. And then we get focused on gaining power rather than what we do once we have achieved that title or that position and we fail to govern. I'm going to stop talking because I want you to talk.
I came to listen to you. But Lisa and I told each other this morning we came because we were curious as to what the other person was going to say. We could, I think, identify many of the reasons we're in the straits that we're in. I hope we'll have a conversation about some of the reforms we might implement. I think Lisa has some ideas. I have some ideas as well. I'm a little bit biased. I think if more states were like Alaska or Colorado, we would have, I think, a greater opportunity here to work together and govern. Maybe it's because we're mountain states. I don't know, we don't have a coast, we don't have the great waters that teem with fish that Alaska has, but when you stand on top of a mountain in Colorado, or Mount McKinley, which I've been fortunate enough to climb, and you look out over the state of Colorado, my first instinct is to say, well, that's the red city there, and there's the blue town there. So there are people down in those towns and cities trying to make the best of their lives, provide for their children, pursue the American dream. And I really try to have that inform what I do as a senator, as I did in the House. It's hard, as Lisa pointed out, because there's so many countervailing pressures here, and it's so tactical. I was reminded, my dad used to say that the football coaches and politicians are a lot alike. You have
You're
to
not
be.
going to be another.
This is all right. To be either in either one of those disciplines, you have to be smart enough to understand the game and dumb enough to think it's important. Now I tried that out. But the point I'm trying to make is we get so tactically oriented here, play to play. Does it really result in you winning the game, much less having a successful season here in Washington? But I should say there are some things I think we could do. We ought to have talking filibusters. Nancy's here, we ought to have as many competitive House districts as we could possibly have. I think that would really drive a different way in which the House operates. I think a return to regular order would make a lot of sense. If you think about the power being concentrated in the leadership teams as opposed to the chairmen, chairwomen, and the committees themselves, I think that's actually led to more of a focus on power instead of product. I was meeting with a group of businessmen in Colorado recently, and they got on me about why can't we make deals like the business community does. And I try to explain to them in some ways power is more seductive than profits, believe it or not. But in the end, how are you using that power? What's the reason that you want to hold it? I don't think I'm saying to any of you here and sharing any philosophies that you all don't hold as well. I mean, given that the Ripon Society is based on Lincoln and Teddy Roosevelt's approach. But I'd like to hear some of your ideas about how we could make this town work in ways that we all want it to work. Because there's so much at stake. Let me end on this note. There's that old saying, academic politics are so vicious because so little's at stake. I think our politics have gotten so vicious because we've forgotten how much is at stake.
Very good.
As our introducer, you get the first question.
Well, thank you all both very much. I mean, I really appreciate your remarks, and I think you're dead on. I guess I was reading the other day that Chris Saliza, the columnist in the Post, who has the Fix column, is and always has his Worst Week in Washington column. Who had the worst week in Washington? He's currently working on a Worst Year in Washington column, and he's invited people to vote on who has had the worst year in Washington. And the current leader is common sense. So I think the reforms that you're talking about are very important. And I guess if there's a question in there somewhere, I guess it's how do you kind of how do we break through with the president, with Congress, get that relationship healed? It seems as though after 2000. We've had this series of challenges to the very legitimacy of the president, whether it was Bush or Obama, whether it was stealing an election or not being born in the U.S. or whatever it might be. But it's so much more of a fundamental challenge to the very legitimacy of the person holding the office rather than challenging political positions that they hold. How do we kind of break through that cycle?
Can I make two quick comments? I thought David Brooks wrote a very insightful column this summer where he talked about the fact that both parties are under the illusion that they're going to wipe the other party out in the next election. We've had these series of wave elections. It's not going to happen. So we ought to get real. Number two, and I want to pay tribute to Lisa, I think one of the opportunities is your campaign rhetoric really matters. And I think there's a potential to create, maybe this is the idealist or the Pollyanna in me, but there's a potential to create a more virtuous cycle. If you campaign predominantly, you got to defend yourself in campaigns. But if you campaign predominantly using the rhetoric of we're going to work together, the rhetoric that brings people together, and then when you win, you're then empowered, I think, as Senator Murkowski is, to go your own way, to be independent-minded, and to find, and again, the point isn't bipartisanship. I thought Chris Dodd and Lamar Alexander both said this at various points. The point isn't being bipartisan, it's getting results. Partisanship by itself is what the founders envisioned. We have strong philosophical differences at times. But in the end, it's finding a way in which to come up with some results. And we have example after example after example. Look at what O'Neill and Reagan did with Social Security in the 80s. That's in part why I think Lisa and I are both big proponents of a Bowles-Simpson-like arrangement to deal with our debt while at the same time making investments in the short-term needs of the country.
I think it is important also to recognize that there's got to be a level of reach out. There's got to be a level of communication. Right now, there is pretty limited interaction or communication between the administration, the White House, and where we're sitting over here in the Capitol. Everybody's kind of got their own domain, their own turf. They're all trying to make their own deal. Well, you do that and you get 3 different deals and we're not going to get anywhere. It's when we figure it out that saying, this is something that we've got to make happen. But it's tough if you haven't had kind of that hand extended for a long period of time. And then now, when I need you, I'm going to pick up the telephone. This is why I think it's so important, whether it's within the Senate or across the chamber there to the House, that we do more relationship building, that we know and understand not only what your party politics are, but the fact that you love to climb mountains, I love to be outside. We've got more in common than just talking about renewable energy. And it's a lot tougher to poke a finger in the eye of somebody that you know that they're a good parent, you know that they love their dog. It all sounds pretty trite, but the fact of the matter is we put up a lot of walls around here. And the more walls you put up, the more insulated you are, and the easier it is to spew the rhetoric, because it's like, well, I don't know you anyway. I don't care what I say. I don't care how you feel about what I say. And that rhetoric then, as Mark says, I think traps us. So everything that we can do, we did the little Secret Santa thing, kind of chuckle about it, but it's a step. Lamar and Mark Warner are doing occasional dinners now over at the Alibi Club, where they invite just kind of a mixed group of members. Kind of the State of the Union date night, mix it up a little bit. There are other things going on. The women members of the Senate gather about every month, every 6 weeks or so, and have dinner. We had our dinner last night, and we were talking as the women of the Senate decided that, by God, if we were running the show around here, we would be out by Friday. There would be no ifs, ands, and buts. We would have the entire Capitol decorated, and but we haven't been given that opportunity.
All the cookies will be done.
Yeah.
We're going to
Making
go.
Christmas cookies at the same time.
We're going to Gloria Steinem. She said, "We put one man on the moon. Let's put them all there."
Marilyn.
It just seems though like we do have a challenge because, and some of us work in the Senate or wherever we work, Monica was much different. But now the media, I mean, you turn on one channel, you know what they're going to say. You turn on another. So the media is feeding this frenzy.
Oh, yes.
The media loves that. And then
Yes.
also you have the social network, the internet, and all of that, and the interest groups using those medias. So you've got more challenges, and I don't know how you address those. But you just definitely are in a different environment than it used to be, which was really wonderful. Those work together. So I don't know how you can fix some of those
I'm waiting for some additional ideas on that front. I think Lisa did put her finger on it when she pointed out, in effect, you can go on TV in this town, you can blast one of your colleagues, and then never have to look at that person eye to eye. This is at its best, this is a small town where actions have consequences and relationships matter. In the end, I do think this is about relationships and people as it is in an institution. You can look at the rules, you can try and understand why you're in the situation you're in. But literally, if you've gone on TV and said something hateful, or that has an ad hominem element about somebody, and then you have to see them on the main street, which is in the tunnels of the Capitol or on the floor of the Senate, I think that's going to give you pause. The point Lisa was making is we don't have that kind of interaction because of the pressures of fundraising. The jet airplane's a curse and a blessing, as is air conditioning.
Air conditioning is the worst.
And as you know, the diplomatic corps used to receive hazard pay for being stationed in Washington, D.C. And then there was a pressure for us to do our work and then go home. I think, could I, in a tangential way, say, I think this will counter what I just said as well. I think both Lisa and I feel when we go home, we get a sense of reality. We get a dose of realism. And actually, when I'm home right now, that's where I'm taking my inspiration, because in the small towns, the large cities, Alaska only has one, but in Colorado, people are getting on. They're making local government work. Thank God for federalism, frankly, although we do need a national set of policies for energy and education, immigration. But that's where I really take my inspiration. So, and that's why I'm an optimist, David, and I always will be. But how we break that cycle here, I think it's more people like Senator Murkowski who just say, here's why I'm running, here's what I want to do for Alaska and the United States. And I think Lisa's been enormously empowered because of the way she won her election. I don't know if it's a one-off, we should hear more from her, but the media, I've had senators, I was in a hearing recently, and I won't give any names, but one senator stayed for 2 minutes, came over and said, hey, have I spent enough time here? I've got to go do some TV. So I think that the tendency has been to think, well, to be a senator means that you're on TV, and actually being a legislator is much more nuanced, much more textured, and takes much more time and patience.
But the media really has changed, not only how the message is being perceived, distributed, understood, spun, but I think to Mark's point, it also changes us. It's like, well, I really want to focus on this particular initiative, but you know what? There's no fundraising dollars that I'm going to generate with this particular issue. There's not much media attention that I'm going to get to it. So maybe I should be doing this issue over here that is a little more high profile or might get me in front of some different people. That ought not be what drives our daily actions. And I think that does have an influence. I'll be very direct with you. When I first came to the Senate and I was looking at those committees that I wanted to serve on, I was told by very well-meaning staff that had been around for a long time, for heaven's sakes, don't get yourself on foreign relations, because if you do, there's no way that you're going to get any fundraising dollars for it. And I'm kind of looking at it, I was like, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China? But yet that is something that goes into the analysis of folks around here. We all ought to be on foreign relations, for heaven's sakes. Anyway, Rick has a question over there.
You asked what you could do. First of all, your own rules preclude a lot of that interaction. Ripon used to take 20, 30 zillion members abroad, and not only, it accomplished all of your tasks. You got to meet new people. You actually got to accomplish things. The House rules pretty much preclude any one of us ever traveling with you unless it's a fundraising trip. So, quite honestly, I think you all need to have the intestinal fortitude to change some of those internal rules so that you can travel with other members. I just got back from a medical mission in West Africa. They're all dying for American politicians to visit as to help develop one of the vast mineral resources and promote the U.S. economy. But thinking about getting a couple of United States senators to actually get on a trip now to go and see someplace where there's economic development. But you can't have a lobbyist, even though they probably know the issue best. So quite honestly, you all have to change the rules so groups like Ripon and other groups that are interested in policy
Lisa and I were,
can do it.
I'm sorry. Lisa and I were talking the other day about maybe we get a counter pledge campaign. So we put, I know the P word's a dangerous word, but we pledge that we're not going to filibuster motions to proceed. We pledge that we won't demonize other members when they travel to far-flung places, because America's very standing in the world depends on the outreach that we do. We were just kicking that around in a loose way. We pledge that we won't attack our opponents because of a hopeful Bowles-Simpson plan that we'll put forth. Just like Reagan and O'Neill agreed that anybody who went after a member of the other party because of the Social Security reforms that occurred in the early 80s would be called out by leaders in that particular
But will you
party.
defend the other member?
You defend.
Not forget about vilifying them. Will you actually go out there
No, you
and
have
defend the other
it's an
member?
affirmative pledge, an affirmative commitment.
I think it was I think there's a little blurb in the Post this morning, but every trip that a member takes, a Codell, is somehow or other now made public, and of course they're mocked in the press, saying, there's another exotic trip going to Brussels, or the air show or whatever. The media has, I think, done an exceptional job of cowing those of us that look at these trips and say, yeah, I want to go over to Japan and see what is going on post Fukushima in the nuclear world.
Are we doing that, by the way?
Well, we're going to try to do it.
February?
And but the other place that I want to go, the Energy Committee has jurisdiction over the territories in the Pacific, whether it's CNMI or the Marshall Islands. We've got some treaty obligations that we're dealing with right now that quite honestly are a little problematic. I have been asked to go over there repeatedly. They've got some labor issues that are on the forefront. And there's a lot of concern about, well, you're thinking about going to a South Pacific island in the wintertime. Do you really want to do that? So do you try to spend your time explaining it, or do you just not go? And therefore not really know and understand what the issue is. We got all kinds of questions popping up. You pick the next one.
I was just thinking, don't be cowed, be a Murkowski.
Yeah! You're good.
Okay, no, you're better.
Who are we talking to? Charlie?
Have you had these conversations with your respective leadership? Because if you look at all that you said, I think everyone in the room will agree 150% with everything you folks have said. What would be the response from your various leadership on these
Want to go
questions?
first?
I think my leadership would say, we'll have a conversation after the election. I think that's what,
Yeah, and then there's always another election.
that's right, we're always in the midst of an election.
We've been talking about mountain metaphors. There are two poles, the North and the South Pole. The third pole is Mount Everest in some corners. I thought perhaps we need to figure out a way to create a third pole that's between the two leadership teams in the Senate. Now, I don't know if that's radical, revolutionary, insubordinate, but and Lisa certainly has participated, I think, in some of a couple of gang efforts that have been successful. And most of the gangs, if you look at the ones that have been successful, have been pointed to a particular topic, a particular problem. But is that a route forward where we create a critical mass and work with and around and through the two leadership structures in the Senate? Maybe I better leave now.
I think,
but
though,
I'm
there
curious what Lisa
is,
would have to say.
well, no, I think that there is a lot of desire for a change between these two very solid poles. you get on the right side, you get on the left side, and never the twain shall meet. You've got organizations, groups that are forming, no labels. There is a growing cry, if you will, for something in the middle. But I have been reminded that when you're in the middle of the road, that's exactly where you get run over. And think about some of our colleagues right now that have been more centrist. They are, at least on the Republican side, they're the ones that are facing the toughest primary challenge right now. So there is no reward for a political figure to be that centrist when you have to deal with the primary systems that we have in this country.
Open primaries would be one important step forward, and also competitive House districts, the more the better, because after a while the rhetoric doesn't matter, results matter. I think the parties would respond, but easy to say, hard to do.
Well, one thing is, I mean, if we're going to make the system work, the House has passed, 27 bills trying to make the economy better. The Senate doesn't even take up any of the bills. Most people in the country don't even know what the House has done. If the Senate, as you say, Senate, go back to regular order, take the bills up. Obviously, they're not going to be the same as the House bill. Go to conference, try to resolve those issues. But just sitting on the House bills and pretending they don't happen, that isn't the way to work together.
I think it's a good point, and regardless of who's in charge, Republicans or Democrats, you recognize that, okay, you're in the majority, you get to set the agenda, and that's the prerogative of leadership. But I think what we are seeing is an erosion, if you will, or perhaps a breakdown in the process. It used to be a time when committee work was exactly that. You worked in committee. You actually took up amendments that you didn't know whether you were going to win or lose that amendment in committee. You worked with your colleagues. You tried to build some consensus. You lost some, you won some, and you built a product in committee. I think the Energy Committee is one of the few committees that I serve on where we're still doing that, but even we as a committee have had our share of breakdowns, and we're kind of at that stage now. We really haven't been able to move some of the more controversial issues. On the Appropriations Committee, we are asked not to bring up any amendments in the markup process that are controversial. We are afraid to do our job, which is to vote on controversial things. And there's some tough stuff, but nobody ever said it was going to be easy. So I think what we've done, again, in an effort to get through elections, in order to protect our members, in order to keep the majority, we're trying to save ourselves from those tough votes. We need to, again, kind of get back to the reason that we're there, which is to govern. And say, well, this may be tough for us as the majority, but this is something that we've got to do. And I think we've lost that. I've only been here 8 years now, but I can tell you that in that 8-year time period, there has been a real shift in terms of the number of issues that are brought either to committee or to floor, where you just kind of spend 4 weeks on the floor with an energy bill that has all kinds of controversial issues in it, but you work it through and you have an end product to deal with afterwards. I think we have gotten away from that regular order. Juanita's one of my old college roommates, just for full
Is that right?
disclosure here. I don't know what she's going to ask.
How much time do you need?
Senator Murkowski has been extremely gracious and never telling any stories out of school about me, so I'm always forever in your debt.
It goes both ways.
There were no stories about Senator Murkowski. She was a cherry blossom princess, and she looked the part, and she was beautiful, and we were all trying to emulate her behavior. And now she's a senator, and I'm a hamster on a wheel. But I agree with everything both of you have said, but if you take those cultural and partisan issues and step them aside, do you think that we would still be in the same situation we are now? Because the fact of the matter is now we're bankrupt and the money is gone. And if I look back on the last 20 years or so, and I look at some of the famous votes, those were all fueled by the currency of money, the NAFTA vote, all the things. And now all of a sudden, the money is gone, and so the currency of deal making is gone. And I wonder if this situation is qualitatively different than it has been before, because there's nowhere to run and there's nowhere to hide. Even if you wanted to, they're just two fundamentally different viewpoints about what to do about being bankrupt. And, all the other stuff makes it much worse, but I wonder if this is not qualitatively different than just partisanship.
To be fair, there is a cultural shift underway in this town in the sense of where our focus has to be. We've never, Juanita, had a environment, well, we have at other times, but I think in our lifetimes where we're talking about cutting spending, about how do we reduce the size of programs. And as you point out, the lubricant often was another third pole or the third party, the appropriators. And that's in part why I think going back to regular order would be really helpful, because that's where relationships that are famous were generated. One of the most notable, of course, is Senator Inouye and Senator Stevens, who's one of Lisa's mentors and who we lost in. I've done my own share of flying in Alaska, and I know how dangerous it is, but that's how you get around. But that's I think that's in part what's happening in this town. That's in some ways a dynamic that's not outside. It's outside of our control in some ways, and so we've been asked to shoulder some really tough challenges, as Lisa points out. But this change in culture of instead of appropriating to the end of the world, we're now trying to figure out what are our priorities and where can we cut back, and then you overlay the economy. And there's nothing that a couple 100,000 new jobs a month wouldn't solve right now, frankly, and that's why I think it's, again, then you can come back to what should we be doing with policy making so that we do everything possible to help the private sector create jobs.
I think you've raised a very, very valid point, though, that the dynamic really has changed in terms of where we are as a nation and our fiscal stability. When you think about the failure of the select committee, a lot has been written about the fact that the politics intervened, or maybe these people who were appointed weren't really serious about brokering a deal. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of what we saw was just basic philosophical belief about how you deal with the problem, with a recognition that philosophically more of the Democrats recognize that in order to deal with this, you have to have increased revenues. And on the other hand, you had the Republicans who were just absolutely locked in to an approach that says reduction in spending, reduction in the size of government. Neither's right, neither's wrong. It is an approach to governance that is as basic as the parties. Mm-hmm. And so I think you really saw that clash play out within the role of the super committee. Maybe we should have seen that from the beginning, but I certainly hoped with everything that I had in me that they would be able to figure out how you come together. I think we saw it is possible with the Simpson-Bowles plan and some of the other proposals that are out there that you can come together with the ideas. But I think with that group, it was just philosophical viewpoints that were at the different ends of the spectrum.
Well,
Jim is giving us the
eye. I promised your schedulers that you guys would be back
really?
9 o'clock. It's now 9:20. You all, this has been one of the most instructive dialogues that we've had. Over 100 members this year, you guys. This has been one of the high points. Please, Mike, Ed, thank
Can we
you.
give Lisa
both
the
of
last?
you.
Can we give Lisa the last word? But can I
Of
get a word in
course.
before?
Next one.
I think one of the most powerful books written about public servants is John Kennedy's Profiles in Courage, and he outlines individuals who not only lost their political careers but often lost their status and their economic standing in life because they took very difficult stands, including Sam Houston, the famous Texan. And I think that it ought to be required reading for all of us because we're not on this earth very long. Our political fortunes really aren't as important as what we add back into this great place we call America. But I leave you this note. Burke, the famous English parliamentarian conservative, I think the Ripon Society probably tracks, he put it quite well. He said, your representative owes you more than his industry. He owes you his judgment. If he sacrifices his judgment to your opinion, he betrays you. And I think that's really the challenge that we've always had, whether it was a President Adams or President Lincoln or President Roosevelt or the couple of thousand senators that Lisa and I have been so honored to join have served the country. I think that's where this boils down to. It's about relationships. It's about putting your conscience and your country before literally your state and your party.
And respect for one another. I think we don't focus enough on the respect side. Respect for your opinion. I may come at it from a different perspective, but I respect the fact that this is your opinion. You represent a constituency that perhaps is different than mine, and sometimes I think we fail in the respect category. And when we fail to respect one another, we fail to respect the institution that we are part of. And when we fail to respect the institution, we should not be surprised when we look at the public opinion polls and we see that Congress's approval rating is about 9%. Ron Wyden says that that's all of our next of kin, and he's probably right. But I think we've got to work to rebuild that respect. Jim, I thank you for letting us be here this morning. Well, I have enjoyed the conversation with my friend and colleague. I kind of feel like, well, we haven't solved anything. We still don't know when we're getting out of here. But I think the discussion is healthy because I think sometimes around here we are afraid to speak the obvious. We're afraid to talk about the fact that, we're not focusing on perhaps the policies that we need to in order to better our country. And so thank you for the opportunity to share a little bit of our innermost thoughts and feelings with you. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all.